Welcome. Today is the 10th day of Sivan, the 16th of June. And we're going to be looking at the first reading of this week's Torah portion, Behaalotecha. And last year we actually already started this series. And we talked about both parts of the first portion, which the first part is dedicated to the lighting of the Menorah, the candelabrum. And the second is related to deals with the installation of the Levites, which required a whole process. We spoke last year about their needing to shave their hair off their entire body, and we developed that. But this year we're going to focus on the first part of the reading. And here we have 4 verses. It's just made up of 4 verses, which describes, one of them, by the way, is God spoke to Moses saying. So it's really short. But and the menorah is mentioned a number of times in the Pentateuch, not just once. We're not going to look at all of them right now. Just this one, which is considered to be very central, as we'll see, because in 3 short verses, it gives us a lot of ideas to think about. So I'm just going to read them first with the Vishnevsky translation. I'm not going to skip because it's a little bit hard sometimes to get his intercalated notes out of the text, but I'll try. So God spoke to Moses saying, we're looking at Numbers 8, verse 1. God spoke to Moses saying, speak to Aaron and say to him, when you kindle the lamps, the lamps means the candles on the menorah. The menorah had 7 candles. So when you kindle the lamps, be sure to place the wicks in those spouts so the 7 lamps, meaning the candles, shine toward the central shaft of the menorah. In other words, each one of the flames was focused towards the middle. There are 2 different opinions in the sages about which is considered to be it's called the Western candle. And here he's using Rashi's interpretation, which is one of the interpretations that's the middle candle is considered to be the one that all the candles need to face. Also be sure to hold the fire to the wick until it burns by itself. In other words, it's not enough to just bring the source of the flame that you're lighting with to the wick. You have to make sure that the wick, as we call it, lights up by itself, meaning that it's hot enough and charred enough to be able to contain the flame and continue burning without your continuing to help it. Aaron did so. He kindled the candles toward the central shaft of the candelabrum, the menorah, exactly as God had commanded Moses. Now we have a verse that describes the making of the menorah. And it says like this. Having the lamps face the central shaft emphasized the fact that the candelabrum was one undivided entity. This is commentary. Now the verse itself. This was the candelabrum, how the candelabrum was made. It was a hammered work of gold, meaning it was made out of one chunk of gold, hammered out to form all its parts. So they started out with a chunk of gold, and they hammered it in order to create the entire menorah. They didn't take pieces and weld them together, which is the way that you would usually do this. In fact, there are knobs called kafturim in the menorah, and they appear where you would assume pieces would be welded together, but they were not. The pieces were all part of one single chunk of gold that was hammered out. This is how the candelabrum is to be made. According to the form that God had shown Moses, so did the artisans construct the candelabrum. So what we have here is a short description of how it was made, and the last part is that it was made according to a vision that Moses was shown. He was actually shown what the candelabrum, what the menorah needs to look like. So what do we do with all these things? So first of all, we need to know that the menorah has always been a Jewish symbol. It's not just that the state of Israel took it as its symbol. I don't know if you know this, but the official symbol or emblem of the state of Israel is the menorah that appears not here in the Pentateuch, but rather the way it's described by Zechariah. And he in chapter 8 has a vision of the menorah in a different way, and it's worth looking at it. And the main thing that it has there is that it has olive branches from both sides, all kinds of other things going on. Obviously, olives are very connected to the menorah because that's what you make the oil that you light the menorah out of. But what we want to look is at four different things here that were indicated in these verses. So they are that the actual, first of all, how you light the candles. That was the first topic. The second topic was the positioning of the candles, especially their flames, their wicks, so that they face what's called the front of the menorah, or we said in the language of the sages, called the western candle. And this has to do with how the menorah was located in the sanctuary. Because the menorah was in the south, it was along the south wall, so the western candle is the one that is closest, as it were, that's what you would think, it's the one that's closest to the to the Holy of Holies. But and there's one opinion in the sages that's like that, except that it's not the one that's most close to it's not the furthermost, the leftmost candle, but rather the second to left. And there's a whole teaching in the sages, in the Talmud, about how they got to this, why it was a second and not the most. In any case, Rashi goes by the simple understanding, which is that the central candle is the central shaft. It's the one that's exactly in the middle. The third topic we saw is that the menorah is made of hammered work. It's one piece. And the fourth is that the overall shape of the menorah had to be made according to a vision that Moses was given at Sinai. Okay, so we have these four pieces to look over, these four topics that we just saw. So the first thing is that the fact that everything was made out of a single chunk of gold is indicative of something that we're not used to talking about so much, but Hasidic thought really makes a lot out of, which is that you might think that what's important about the menorah is not the body of the menorah, but rather the light that it emits. But comes the Torah and says, and this was very difficult to actually accomplish, you have to make the menorah out of a single chunk of gold. The body has to be unified. And again, we said the option is to join pieces together, to weld them. So what is this saying? It's telling us that despite the fact that the purpose of the Jewish people is to light the presence of God in the world, is to light the will of God in the world, the teachings of God, and so on, apart from that, there's also an importance to the Jewish body. And this is especially true, again, like I said, in Hasidic thought. Hasidic thought was very connected, for instance, to the land of Israel, because the land of Israel is the place where the Jewish body thrives the most, where it belongs in a sense. So what it's telling us here is that all the bodies come from the same source. They have to be unified. And this is actually very important because we usually, when we have disagreements, the disagreements are not because of our bodies. The disagreements are because of our, you could say, the candle that's sitting on top of the body, the thoughts that we have, the opinions that we have, and so on, our actions. But when you go down to the level of the body, you see true unity. And that, we're in a very difficult situation right now with the war that's going on. When we woke up, or we finished with Shabbos last night, and we heard the news that 8 soldiers had been killed in one day. The way the Jews react to this is as if my own child was killed. And it's not just a reaction that's spiritual. It's a very physical reaction, because in a certain sense, all Jews, regardless of their opinions, there are always exceptions, but all Jews feel that we're united in one body. that really we have one body. And this comes from this idea of the menorah being one piece. There's more to say about this, but I'll leave it to you to look at the Patreon to read more about this. The second topic we said is that Aaron the priest, he kindles the lamps. He kindles each one of these candles. And he kindles them in such a way that the light has to hold on. The flame has to grab a hold of the wick. What is it? This is already talking about the spiritual. And what it's saying is that God has placed in every generation people like Aaron, who are the tzaddikim, the pious of the generation, whose role it is to kindle people's hearts and minds. And the way that, what this really means is that there's a partnership in Judaism between those who have certain types of souls, who can teach, who can inspire people, and others. And we need each other for different things. It could be that the pious man needs help from the people whose souls he's kindling in terms of his physical needs or whatever else, and there's a back and forth. There's always a symmetrical connection between the people. The third thing that we saw is that in the end, all the wicks are supposed to point to a single candle. So what does this mean? It means that even though each candle is separate and each candle represents a different path of serving God, we've talked about this in on other occasions, actually in Parshat Re'eh, if somebody wants to go and see it, the 7 kosher paths that are connected to the 7 kosher animals. There are 7 different, or we'll just say several different paths in life of how to serve God. There are people who serve God through loving kindness. There are those who serve God through might, through their strength. There are those who serve God through beauty, and so on. Still, when the menorah is functioning properly, and again, it's a symbol of the Jewish people, when it's functioning properly, they all point, all these flames, all these ways of serving God point to a single central source or core. And the idea is that we are united in the end with our goal. The goal, regardless of how different people carry it out in their lives, the goal is the same, and that is to reveal godliness in the world. That has always been the goal of Judaism. And the fourth point that we mentioned, that the shape of the menorah, the intricacy, the beauty of it, followed what Moses was shown at Mount Sinai as a vision. So this comes and says that we all take part in Moses' vision. This is not such an easy thing to understand, because Moses is different than all the other prophets. The Torah says there's many prophets. There were 600,000 men and women in the Jewish people alone that were prophets. There could be prophets elsewhere. Balaam was a prophet. The difference was that Moses saw through what we call a transparent pane, like a transparent pane of glass. He sees the world for what it is, and he sees the godliness that is the world. Another way that this is said, and this is actually at the end of our Torah reading this week, Parshat Behaalotecha, in the 6th reading, we'll see this. God says, God witnesses about Moses that he sees my picture. Now, obviously, God doesn't have a picture, so the explanation of this is that that Moses is able to see reality in the way that God sees reality. He sees it from the divine perspective. Now, since Moses is not just the giver of the Torah, he is also the continual shepherd of the Jewish people. Every single Jewish soul has a part of Moses in it. We call this part a nitzotz, like a spark of Moses within every soul. And so every soul, every Jewish soul has the ability to see part of reality, a stripe of reality, from God's perspective. And that's the fourth point that the Menorah teaches us about. So thank you very much for joining today. Hope to see you during the rest of the week. We should all be well and healthy and see each other in good spirits. Bye-bye.